Design your practice. So far, we have learned about ways to cultivate awareness of our habits, thoughts, and emotions so that we can notice what shows up within us when we face challenges, and ways to cultivate self-compassion so that we can resiliently overcome our common challenges. Now it's time for you to take actions to apply your learning to your life. You will reflect on your current habits and design your practice that's unique to you so that you can work with challenges with more compassion and purpose. This lesson will take you step by step to design your practice and share ideas that can help you commit to your practice because it's only with consistent practice that you will observe noticeable changes within you. This lesson goes hand in hand with the lesson on coaching, as coaching can also help to figure out ways to move forward with the support from a friend. I will indicate explicitly how each step corresponds to the coaching steps so that you can apply both when designing your practice. So here we go. So reflecting on your life now, what are some areas of your life that you find challenging and you experience strong discomfort? Perhaps it has to do with how you deal with failure and get in the trap of self-criticism, or how you might have trouble stepping out of your comfort zone. You might have a tendency to distract yourself or procrastinate things that make you feel uncomfortable but are important. Or perhaps you might find it difficult to work with conflicts or disagreements, or may have developed habits of certain ants, automatic negative thoughts, or getting trapped in certain emotion thoughts loop and find it difficult to regulate certain emotions. These are some of the main topics covered in this unit, and you may find that you have challenges beyond what was discussed. What's important is that you find a habit that is currently not serving yourself or others that is significant enough that you wish to create changes in, especially pertaining to how you deal with challenges and discomfort. So you might have an area too in mind at this point that you might want to work on. The first step to designing your practice is to understand the issue that you're working with well. This section corresponds with 1, what's going on, and 2, what might be making you stuck, sections in coaching. So you can also use the information you get from this section of coaching to work on the exercise that follows. Oftentimes, when we have an ongoing issue, we're only trying to deal with the issue at a superficial level. If we were thinking of our issue as a big iceberg, then we're only dealing with the iceberg that is above the water. However, the rest of the iceberg is beneath the water, and either we're not aware of it or we're avoiding it because it makes us feel too uncomfortable to deal with it at the deep level. So to reveal the issue both above and beneath the water, we're going to be mapping out the issue using a loop chart. I'll share with you how this loop chart works, and then I'll go through an example later. First, you identify the problem or the issue that you're currently experiencing, whether it is your tendency to get into comparative thinking or to be excessively self-critical in times of failure. For each issue, map out what coping strategies you're applying to deal with the issue. Coping strategies are things you're doing to bandage the issue but are not fundamentally solving the issue. Because these coping strategies are only bandages, the issue still exists in your life. Then think of what the costs are for yourself and others when you're applying the coping strategies besides the issue continuing to exist, because perhaps there are secondary issues that result from your coping strategies. Then map out the reasons for why you might apply the coping strategies even with the secondary problems. So far, we've been focusing on the iceberg that is above the water. Now we'll be focusing our attention to the iceberg underneath. If you were to create fundamental change to the issue that you're experiencing, then what are some strategies that you could apply? More often than not, we understand what needs to be done, but we have a tendency to avoid these solutions because they make us feel too uncomfortable. These strategies are things that you believe will put an end to the issue. Then write out what prevents you from engaging in the strategies to make fundamental changes. Lastly, as you're thinking through each step, also connect with your emotional experiences. Map out what emotions play a role at each stage. This can reveal what emotional experiences can be leading you to or impeding you from making certain choices in your life. To make this process a little easier to understand, let me walk you through an example. So let's say that an issue is that I feel like I have trouble making genuine connections with other people and making close friends. So, how I deal with the problem as coping strategies are pretending to fit into a group of friends, distracting myself with social media, and trying to get attention from others by overreacting to some matters. One of the reasons why I apply these coping strategies is because I feel sad about the situation, lonely, but I also feel hope that these strategies will bring people to me who I feel like I can connect with. But since these strategies are not getting to the heart of the issue, I feel regret and frustration, and my issue of not being able to make close friends continues. So, what are the costs of getting stuck with these coping strategies? Perhaps these strategies prevent me from sharing my genuine self as I'm pretending to fit in, and they prevent me from creating trust with my friends. Now, with these secondary issues, I experience further sadness and loneliness. So, why do I keep using these coping strategies? Well, they work fine on a surface level, and I care too much about what others think, so it's better to pretend to fit in, and I don't have to face my own personal deficiencies if I pretend to fit in or distract myself with social media. So, what are some strategies that I could apply to make fundamental changes in the issue? Well, I could share who I really am freely with others, or I could improve skills in empathy building and open communication with others. The emotions that will drive me to these strategies will be hope that they will change the current state that I feel stuck in, but at the same time, I would experience fear that they may not work. By applying these strategies, they could lead me to change the issue and I can experience happiness and love. So, what's preventing me from taking these actions? Well, perhaps there is not enough feeling of safety to share myself, well, not enough motivation to take these actions. The environment might not be conducive to support growth in building relationships, and maybe there are not enough skills and knowledge in the people around me to help me grow. By using the loop chart to map out the issue you're experiencing, you're able to reveal not only the issue but also the underlying reasons for the issue continuing to exist. So I encourage that you map out your issue using the loop chart. Perhaps it will help for you to engage in this activity with a couple of other people so that you can talk through your issues, which can help you reveal things that you might not notice on your own. To help you understand your issues even more, you might engage in research on certain topics pertaining to your problem. So, for example, if you might be having difficulty with regulating anger, then perhaps you might find out more about what anger is and what's happening in your brain when anger shows up. You can engage in a variety of research like literature research or interviewing professionals. You might also dissect the issue and find out where exactly the issue lies. You might use your loop chart and find out what is the biggest impediment to you solving the issue. Is it emotional? Is it lack of skills? Is it getting stuck in certain thought patterns? If it has to do with emotional regulation, then perhaps you can look back to the emotional regulation video and remind yourself the various areas that emotions can be regulated and where there is a breakdown in the current situation. So dig as deep as you need to really understand your issue. The second stage of designing your practice is in identifying your hopes for change and why they are important for you. This stage corresponds with 3, what are your hopes and wishes, and 4, why is it important to you, steps in coaching. This stage requires that you shift from the survival state that we tend to get into when we're wallowed in our issues to growth mode and imagine possibilities. For this stage, you can imagine the person you wish to become if the issue you're experiencing was to be solved completely. What will you be doing? What will you be feeling? What kinds of connections will you be making with others? Think in terms of what you hope to see more of in yourself as well as what you hope to see less of. And for each thing that you identify, dig deeper and ask yourself, why this is important for you? What are your fundamental human needs that will be fulfilled if the imagined future self were to come to life? Now you can do this exercise by writing words or drawing shapes and or colors, whatever seems to express yourself most honestly. It's also important to do this step with self-compassion because for some of us, we could beat ourselves up for not being the version of the self that we wish to be. So be accepting and be kind to yourself. The third stage of designing your practice is to imagine specific steps to move forward with. This corresponds with 5. What are your options in coaching? The steps to move forward with often come in the form of practice. Remember that there are two main types of practices. There's training, which is setting aside time to practice, like waking up at 6:30 a.m. every day to practice 15 minutes of meditation every morning. Another type of practice is response, which is how we respond to people, situations, and emotions in our daily lives, like taking a deep breath whenever I sense anger showing up in my body. When coming up with these practice ideas, it's important to consider the lens of both training and response. Just to give some examples, perhaps you might engage in a training practice of journaling 3 things you're grateful for each day to lift you out of the negative thinking patterns. Perhaps you might aspire to be an artist, but you're terrified of taking this leap. You might commit to making 3 sketches each day to improve your drawing skills to overcome the fear of stepping out of your comfort zone. Perhaps you might build in a meditation practice first thing in the morning each day to practice awareness. You don't have to come up with ideas for practice on your own. There are websites that can introduce you to good practices for different things you might be working on. I highly recommend you to start with the Berkeley Greater Good in Action website for some preliminary ideas. You can also find apps that can support you in your practice. So for example, you would already be familiar with Mood Meter in keeping track of your emotions. An app like Calm can help you with your meditation sessions for various issues you might be trying to work with, including anxiety and negative thoughts. Now, keeping the different types of practices in mind and getting help from external sources, it's time to brainstorm as many practices as possible. Now, when brainstorming your practices, it might help to create a mind map and keep building on each idea. You can put different spins on the ideas you're generating to see if you can come up with creative practices as well. So for example, for training, you might think about a practice that I could do alone, a practice that requires interacting with others, a practice that would be a bit challenging, and a practice that would be really challenging but worth it. For response type of practices, you might think of prompts like whenever I have an all or nothing ant pop up, I will, or whenever I feel anger show up, then I will do this. So have fun with this process and come up with out-of-box ideas because even if they seem unrealistic, they can give you inspiration for other ideas you might generate that may be more realistic but fun to engage with. After you generate 10, 20, or 30 ideas for your practice, it's time to start prioritizing the practice that you will commit to. This chart is useful to prioritize your practice. So on the x-axis, you will find the effort that you will need to put into to execute your practice from low to high. And then on the y-axis, you will find the impact that the practice is likely to have in bringing about the change that you wish to see or fulfilling your needs. Map all of your ideas out on this chart. You would be likely to have practices in the top left quadrant that require low effort and have high impact. But if you do, welcome them. You also want to pay attention to the practices in the top right quadrant, which require effort but will have high impact. It might be hard to do many practices in this quadrant, but you may be able to commit to 1 or 2 to start with. The next stage of designing your practice is to plan your next steps and specifically map out the actions that you will take. This corresponds with 6. What is the next smallest action you will take in coaching? You can begin this process by creating a practice plan. You can illustrate your plan in the form of a table. So on the left, you will write your practice commitments that you would have selected from the previous step. You don't want too many that it's overwhelming, and you don't want too few that it yields very little impact. So for each practice, describe what you will do, when you will do it, how long it will take, and how you will reflect on the practice. It's important that your description here is as specific as possible. Otherwise, your practice will not happen. Make sure that it's observable so that if you ask yourself the question, did I complete my practice today? You can easily answer yes or no. The reflection is very important for response type of practice as you want to gather information on how your response worked to adjust and refine your practice. Now, on the right column, it's important to describe what you wish to fulfill with these practices. This description is important to ensure that your practice is not just a random practice that doesn't get to the heart of the issue, but it's aligned with your hopes. The reason why we keep saying practice is because your commitment to action is not a single occurrence, but it's something that you will continuously commit to over time. Over time, you will find that your vision of your future self and your current self will overlap more and more, but this will not happen overnight. What you see here are three typical paths that you could take moving forward. What do you think each one represents? Imagine that the dot in the middle shows the point at which you will begin to initiate your practice. So A shows a scenario of you intending to begin your practice but never actually taking the action. Obviously, with no action, there is no change. B shows a scenario of you being able to actually start your practice, but your practice only lasted for a short while. So over time, you would go back to where you started. C shows a scenario of you starting your practice and committing to the practice even at times when you don't feel like it. So over time, you'll find a change in yourself that is sustainable. You will actually get closer to the future vision of yourself. So do you think you can commit to the practice? Do you think you have a good sense of self-control? Well, let me tell you that for many of us, while we may be able to commit to a practice for a short period of time, it will require a lot of energy for us to commit to it over a long period of time. This is because our brain is constantly looking for new ways to save energy. So you have two major areas in the brain. One that is turned on when you experience instant gratification, and one that is activated when you get long-term gratification. So, what are some things that bring about instant gratification for you? Maybe eating a tub of ice cream or watching a fun movie? Well, when you do these things, a gush of dopamine is released in the brain, which gives you an instant sense of pleasure, and little energy is used to activate this part of the brain. Because there's instant pleasure and little energy required, these behaviors can easily made into habits. Now, what are some things that yield long-term gratification? Perhaps running for 30 minutes each day or practicing 1 hour of piano each day. The long-term gratification is processed in your prefrontal cortex, and this part of the brain uses a lot of energy to engage in these behaviors, and they require a lot of willpower and self-control. Because a lot of energy is required, it's challenging to make these behaviors into a habit. So it's good to know ahead of time that whatever practice you design, creating and sustaining new habits for long-term well-being takes a lot of willpower and self-control so that you're mentally prepared for it. Therefore, to form new habits, there are a few key things to consider. Create clear goals linked to your values so that you care. This is what we were doing in our practice plan, putting your practice right next to your vision. Find a way to monitor and be aware of your progress. So you can be creative with this, and I will share some ideas in the next slide. Recognize and factor in energy ups and downs. Realize that some days you will not want to practice, perhaps because you're tired or because you're in a bad mood. The important thing is that you do it anyway. If you fall off the track, you can always start again. Start small and build. So for example, if you wish to commit to daily meditation, it helps to perhaps start with 5 minutes, then build to 10 and 15 and so on. Habits take time to form. So in general, habit formation occurs between 28 to 66 days. For any new behaviors in your life, it's going to feel uncomfortable, and it will take this many number of days of consistent practice for the new behavior to not feel so odd anymore. Therefore, the key is to keep it up. Any lull in the practice will prolong this habit formation period. So, Ralph Waldo Emerson said, sow a thought and you reap an action. Sow an act and you reap a habit. Sow a habit and you reap a character. Sow a character and you reap a destiny. To help keep up with your newly designed practices, it helps to have reminders where they catch your eyes. Perhaps for some of you, you might make a poster that you see the first thing you wake up. Perhaps some of you might find an app that can act as your reminder, or if a suitable app is not available, you might choose to create an app yourself. For some of you, you might choose to put a post it on your bathroom mirror. Now, these reminders can have different things that can help motivate you. For example, inspirational or motivational quotes, reminder of your core values, or pictures, or specific reminders, or calendar to check off your commitment each day, or incentives like if you keep up the practice for 2 weeks, then you treat yourself to a yummy cake. Now, some of my students in the past have created very unique tools and come up with very interesting incentives that they know will motivate them when their energy is down. So you can have fun with making these tools that work for you. The last step of designing your practice consists of creating a support system to help you keep up your practice. This corresponds with 7. How did it go in coaching? Besides the reminders and incentive tools that you can create, another thing that helps greatly with keeping up with your practice is to have an accountability partner. This is a person who is invested in your growth and will check in with you every now and then to remind you of your practice and encourage you if you need it. Now, research shows that we are 3 times more likely to succeed at making a change in our lives when we ask someone to hold us accountable for our actions. If you choose to go through a coaching session to help design your practice, then it helps to ask your coach to be your accountability partner as well.